Every civilization that has ever existed believed it would last forever. The Romans built monuments meant to stand for eternity, carved with the confidence of a people who could not imagine their world ending. The Maya raised cities into the jungle canopy and tracked the stars with breathtaking precision. The Bronze Age kingdoms of the Mediterranean built a glittering, interconnected world of trade and writing and gold. Every one of them was certain they were permanent, and every single one of them is gone. Not one has survived. When you look across the entire span of human history, you find the same thing over and over. Great civilizations rise, they flourish, they tower over the world, and then they fall, sometimes so completely that we forget they ever existed at all. So here's the question that should genuinely unsettle you. If every civilization before us collapsed, what makes us think ours won't? And is there some hidden mechanism, some pattern that dooms them all? The graveyard of civilizations. To even ask the question properly, we have to look at just how strange and how universal this is. This isn't a story about one or two unlucky empires. It's a near-perfect track record of failure. The Roman Empire, which ruled the Western world for centuries and whose roads and laws still shape your life today, fell so hard that the population of the city of Rome dropped from perhaps 1 million people to just tens of thousands. Aqueducts stopped flowing. The knowledge to maintain them was simply lost. The Maya abandoned their great cities to the jungle, leaving temples to be swallowed by vines for 1,000 years. The Indus Valley Civilization, one of the largest of the ancient world, vanished so thoroughly we still can't fully read their writing. Easter Island, Angkor, the Khmer, the Akkadians, the Minoans. The list goes on and on. A graveyard of societies that each believed they were the exception. None of them were. Why the obvious answers fail. So what kills them? For a long time, people reached for the obvious answers. And the obvious answers all seem to work until you look closer. Maybe it's invasion. Barbarians at the gates. But invaders had been at the gates of Rome for centuries before it fell, and Rome absorbed them, defeated them, hired them. A strong society shrugs off invasion. The question is why it becomes weak enough that invasion finishes it. Maybe it's climate, a drought, a cooling, a famine. And climate is real, and it matters enormously. But civilizations survive droughts all the time. Egypt endured for thousands of years through cycle after cycle of bad harvests. So a drought alone can't be the answer either. Maybe it's moral decay, the old story that societies grow soft and decadent and rot from within. But that's less an explanation than a judgment. Every generation thinks the next one is soft. It never quite explains the actual mechanics of why the lights go out. Each of these can be part of the story. None of them, on their own, is the story. Which means the real cause has to be something deeper, something underneath all of these, something built into the very structure of what a civilization is. Tainter, the complexity trap. And in 1988, an anthropologist named Joseph Tainter proposed exactly that. His idea is one of the most compelling explanations anyone has ever offered. And once you understand it, you start seeing it everywhere. Tainter's argument begins with a simple observation. Civilizations are machines for solving problems. And the way they solve problems is by adding complexity. Think about what that means. A small village has a shortage of food, so it develops agriculture. Agriculture requires people to track the seasons, so it develops a calendar and a priestly class. More food means more people, which requires organization, so it develops administrators, records, laws. Trade grows, so it needs roads, courts, a military to protect them, tax collectors to fund it all. Every problem is met with a new layer of complexity. More officials, more specialists, more rules, more infrastructure, and for a long time, this works beautifully. Complexity is a fantastic investment. The first roads, the first bureaucracies, the first armies pay for themselves many times over. Society climbs higher and higher. But here is the trap, and it is a brutal one. Complexity has a cost. Every new layer, every official, every institution, every mile of road has to be paid for in energy, in food, in human labor, in resources. And Tainter's crucial insight is this. The returns on complexity diminish. The first solutions you buy are cheap and powerful. But over time, the easy problems are already solved, and each new problem is harder and more expensive to fix than the last. You add a layer of bureaucracy, and it barely helps. You add another, and it helps even less. Eventually, you reach a point where you are pouring enormous resources into maintaining a system that gives you almost nothing back. You're not getting stronger anymore. You're just running to stand still. And then, past a certain point, it gets even worse. The complexity itself becomes the problem. The bureaucracies conflict. The rules contradict each other. It costs more to hold the whole thing together than the whole thing is worth. Your society is now spending everything it has just to keep the lights on, with nothing left over for the next shock that comes along. And a shock always comes along. This is the part that makes Tainter's theory so unsettling. It means collapse isn't some freak accident that befalls unlucky societies. It's the natural, almost inevitable endpoint of success itself, the very thing that makes a civilization powerful. Its ability to grow more and more complex to solve its problems is the same thing that eventually makes it too expensive to sustain. Civilizations don't die because they do something wrong. They die because they keep doing the thing that made them successful, long past the point where it still works. Growth is the strategy, and growth is the trap. The Bronze Age collapse, synchronous failure. Now let's see what this actually looks like when it happens, because there's one collapse that shows the whole terrifying mechanism in action. Around the year 1200 BC, the Eastern Mediterranean was home to a dazzling, interconnected world. The Egyptians, the Hittites, the Mycenaean Greeks, the great trading cities of the coast, all bound together in a web of trade and diplomacy so tight that a king in one land would write letters to a king in another calling him brother. Tin from one region, copper from another, grain, gold, and luxury goods flowing across the whole system. It was, in its way, the first globalized world. And then, in the span of just a few decades, it all came crashing down. City after city was destroyed or abandoned. Entire kingdoms vanished. Writing systems were lost. Trade routes went dark. A brilliant, connected civilization fell into a dark age that lasted centuries. And when historians dug into why, they found something chilling. It wasn't one disaster. It was many, all at once. A long, punishing drought. Earthquakes, waves of migration and raiding by mysterious groups we call the Sea Peoples, internal rebellion. Any one of these, the system could probably have survived, but they struck together, and the very interconnectedness that had made this world so rich became the thing that destroyed it. Because everything was linked, the failure of one part dragged down the next. Trade collapsed, so kingdoms couldn't get the metals they needed. Famine spread, so people rebelled and migrated. Each failure triggered the next in a cascade until the entire glittering system unraveled all at once. Historians have a name for this: synchronous failure. And it points at the real danger hiding inside every advanced civilization. It's not usually a single knockout blow. It's the way a highly connected, highly complex society can turn its own strengths into a chain of falling dominoes. The connections that let it thrive in good times become the channels that spread catastrophe in bad times. The more tightly woven the system, the harder and faster it can unravel. The twist: collapse is simplification. And here is the twist that reframes the entire idea of collapse. We tend to imagine collapse as pure catastrophe, fire and ruin, and the end of everything. But look closer at what actually happens, and it's something stranger. Collapse is often a society shedding complexity it can no longer afford. When Rome fell, people didn't simply die out. Many of them stopped paying for a vast, expensive empire that was giving them less and less, and returned to simpler, smaller, local ways of living that they could actually sustain. From the inside, collapse is a tragedy, but from a distance, it can look almost like a correction, a system that grew too heavy for its foundation, snapping back to a level it could support. Collapse, in this view, isn't the opposite of civilization. It's the built-in release valve for a civilization that climbed higher than it could hold. And there's something important to understand about how this actually feels to the people living through it, because it's almost never the way the movies show it. We picture collapse as a single dramatic day. The barbarians pour over the wall, the city burns, and everyone knows the world has ended. But real collapse is usually slow and quiet and almost invisible from the inside. It happens across generations. The roads get a little worse each year. The coins are worth a little less. The government's promises get a little emptier. Services that used to work reliably start to fail, and people simply adjust and call it normal. Most people living through the fall of Rome had no idea they were living through the fall of Rome. They thought they were living through a rough few decades, a bad emperor, a hard winter, a temporary decline that would surely turn around soon. The great turning points of history rarely announce themselves. To the people inside them, they just feel like things getting harder in ways that are easy to explain away. By the time it's undeniable that the world has changed, the change is already long over. Collapse doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a slow erosion of the ordinary. The modern mirror. So let's return to the question that started all this. If every civilization before us has fallen, what about ours? And here I have to be honest. because the honest answer is more interesting than simple doom. In some ways, we are more vulnerable than any civilization in history. Ours is the most complex, most interconnected, most tightly coupled society that has ever existed. A world where a disruption in one country empties shelves on the other side of the planet, where our entire way of life depends on globe-spanning supply chains, power grids, and networks that most of us never think about and couldn't survive without. That is exactly the kind of hyper-coherence, the same fragile interconnectedness that brought down the Bronze Age. In that sense, we have built the largest, most intricate structure ever balanced on the edge. But in other ways, we are unlike anything that came before. And this is the part the doomsayers leave out. We are the first civilization that can actually see this pattern. Every previous society walked into collapse blind, unable to imagine it, unable to name it. We have studied it. We have the records of dozens of fallen empires laid out in front of us. We understand, at least in theory, the trap of complexity and the danger of synchronous failure. No civilization before us has ever known the mechanism of its own potential undoing. Whether that knowledge is enough to save us, whether we can actually act on it, or whether we'll repeat the pattern anyway, is the great open question of our time. History says every civilization falls, but history has never before had a civilization that understood why. So the next time you walk through a city past buildings and systems that feel eternal and unshakable, remember that every civilization that ever felt exactly the same way. They stood in their great cities, surrounded by monuments they were sure would outlast time, and they had no idea they were living in the final chapter. The Romans didn't know they were the last Romans. The Maya didn't know. Ours is the first society with the chance to know better, to see the pattern coming, and choose this time to do something about it. Whether we will is a story that hasn't been written yet, and we are the ones holding the pen.